Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I want to look at the week starting on Monday, June the 3rd, 2024. And this week runs through until Sunday, June the 9th, 2024. Just to let you know what the structure of this video is going to be, I'm going to start by looking at what is happening astrologically this week. And I'm going to just do a blow-by-blow account. I don't look at forecasts of the 12 signs in this video. I do have daily videos where I look at that. If you want your daily forecasts, there are videos which I do put out every day. But in terms of this video, I just look at the planetary aspects by and large, and that's what I start with. And having done my blow-by-blow account of the planetary aspects, in this video, I'm going to look at one event which I regard as being important. And that one event is the new moon, because on Thursday, June 6th, there is a new moon. And that is something I want to look at in detail, and I want to consider what the impact of this new moon might be for us and for the world, and also for certain individuals. And you can see some of the individuals in the thumbnail who I think might be impacted by this new moon. You've got Prince Harry. You've got Barron Trump. I haven't looked at Barron Trump before. I suppose until very recently he was a child, and he's just turned 18. So I think it's okay to look at Barron Trump's horoscope now. I think that's not a problem. I suppose I've already looked at the horoscopes in terms of the British royal family, royal children. So if it's okay to do that, then surely it's okay to look at Barron Trump's horoscope. I also have on the thumbnail picture of Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, and of course that perennial favourite, Volodymyr Zelensky. Oh yes, we have to talk about him, don't we? And there are a couple of other things I want to talk about, but that's the astrological section. So having done the astrological section of a video, the last part is going to be the I Ching, and that's where I look at the week ahead from a perspective of I Ching, and I have 4 sections. I look at the I Ching reading from a general view in terms of money, in terms of career and business, and then in terms of relationships. Just a reminder that you don't have to watch the I Ching segment of this video. It only relates to those watching the video. So if you don't watch that section, you're not part of the forecast. It doesn't impact you. So I thought I wanted to get that warning, I suppose. I suppose it is a warning, because what I don't want is people to sort of go into the I Ching reading and without really knowing what they're doing, not really thinking about it, and then giving them a forecast that they didn't really want to hear. So you do have a choice in the matter. Okay, let's start off by looking at the week. And what we have here is the chart for the beginning of a week. Midnight, Monday, June the 3rd, New York time. There's no particular reason it's New York. It's just a matter of convenience. It could be London. It could be Cape Town. Doesn't matter. But I've just decided to go for New York. And so if you like, those are the start positions. And we can see that the moon at the beginning of a week is right at the end of Aries. The moon is waning. So the waning part of the lunar cycle tends to be the unfortunate part. A waning moon is regarded as being malefic. A waxing moon is regarded as being benefic. So we're at the end of an old cycle. So maybe you might take the view that you want to wait until the new moon before doing anything, especially now as we're moving towards the very end of the lunar cycle. And there are some important sign changes coming up. And you'll notice that Mercury at the beginning of the week is at 2942 Taurus, so it's right at the end of Taurus. Mars also is starting to move into late Aries, getting ready for a sign change. And in terms of the first major event of the week, which is on Monday, June the 3rd, it is Mercury moving into Gemini. And Mercury moving into Gemini, I think, is a big event. That means the last personal planet has left Taurus. So the Taurus emphasis has now gone. All we've got left in Taurus is Uranus, which will be in Taurus for quite a long time. So it's because Uranus is a slow mover. But now the emphasis is very much on Gemini. So Mercury moves from Taurus to Gemini. And you might think that that is quite a good movement, quite fortunate, because Mercury in Taurus is a little bit slow and considered. Okay, it likes to think things through, which is good, but Mercury in Gemini, that's Mercury's sign, isn't it? Mercury moves and functions very well in Gemini. And, we associate Mercury in Gemini with a sharp mind, good conversational skills, good communication skills. And so we certainly get all of that, especially as the moment Mercury moves into Gemini, it starts to make a conjunction to Jupiter, which, it is fortunate. And I think that a lot of us are going to find that our minds are moving faster. And we might also notice that other people's minds are moving faster. Things are going to be more frenetic. Though there is a problem with Mercury moving into Gemini. And that is, it moves into the same sign as the Sun. And moves into Gemini, and it starts getting closer to the Sun. Now, I don't think that's an immediate problem this week. But in the jargon, Mercury is under sunbeams. So sunbeams is a sort of traditional idea. It's like being combust. So a planet is combust when it's really close to the Sun. And one step away from combustion is under sunbeams. So Mercury is under sunbeams. So although Mercury in Gemini is sort of well placed because it's in its own sign, it is not entirely objective, not quite as objective as it would like to be. So that might be one problem of Mercury moving into Gemini. And then on Tuesday, June the 4th, the Sun makes a conjunction to Venus. And there are several ways of looking at a Sun conjunct Venus. It's a bit of a controversy, actually, because in general, conjunctions to the Sun are not fortunate. There's this idea of combustion. When you get too close to the Sun, you get burnt up. But there is this phenomena called the Cazimi conjunction. Cazimi is when a conjunction is really close. I think one view is that might be 17 arc minutes. I think William Lilly in Christian Astrology, when he was writing in the 17th century, I think off the top of my head, he was suggesting 17 minutes. So it's like, when Venus gets really close to the Sun, or indeed any planet gets really close to the Sun, it, at a certain point, is on the same wavelength as the Sun. And when it's exactly on the same wavelength, it doesn't get burnt, it doesn't get hurt. It's kind of immune to the Sun's influence. At least that's one way of looking at it. As I said, it's a controversial view. And so maybe on Tuesday, when the Sun and Venus are exactly conjunct, this may be a time when the Sun and Venus are working at the same level. And this might be a time when we can be very effective in terms of communication, in terms of relating, and we might be fortunate. But I don't know, I'm not entirely convinced by that. Because if you're right close to the sun, you can be blinded. And I think we do have to be aware of that. Venus is about taste, aesthetic judgment, and we might not be able to understand what's going on. We might make the wrong calls. We might think something is attractive or worth spending money on, when in fact it's just garbage. So that is one possibility. And in terms of relationships with Sun conjunct Venus, I think the Sun conjunct Venus is going to attract relationships, bring new relationships even closer, make that a real possibility, but we may not be able to see someone for what they're really like. So in terms of our social life, if we meet someone new, we need to be a bit careful, because we may not be able to evaluate other people in a way that is entirely accurate, and we could make errors of judgment. Then on Thursday, that's Thursday, June the 6th, we have a new moon. So the new moon is the beginning of a new lunar cycle. The moon is now waxing after the new moon. That new moon is on Thursday. I think it's at 1:38 p.m. London time. So it's just after lunch if you're in London on Thursday. But I'm going to be looking at that new moon in more detail in a moment. But suffice it to say, it is a new beginning, and it is in Gemini, and it's perhaps a time for sort of new ideas, and perhaps we'd had ideas in the past that didn't really make sense, or it wasn't the right time, but we can now start to think about ways of putting these ideas into action. And at the same time, we can be quite flexible. But I'll be talking about that very soon. Then Saturday, June the 8th, Mars is starting to move out of Aries. It's right at the end of Aries, and it's making a semi-sextile to Neptune on Saturday. And that semi-sextile between Mars and Neptune could be problematic. Mars is how we try to assert ourselves in Aries. We're trying very hard to assert ourselves, particularly in Aries. We might as well make the most of Aries while it's there, but with the last degree of Aries, what can we do? And we find we get distracted. Mars semi-sextile Neptune. Neptune is a planet of deception and subterfuge, and it might not be a good idea to assert ourselves directly on Saturday, because if we do, we might make mistakes, or we might pursue the wrong things and get ourselves into trouble. Now, Sunday, there are actually two big events on Sunday. The first big event is Mars moving into Taurus. Finally, Mars has left Aries. In some ways, that is a bit of a shame, because Mars rules Aries. It's very strong in Aries. Yet Mars in Taurus doesn't work quite so well. Mars, rules Scorpio, so it's in its detriment in Taurus. And if you have Mars in Taurus, don't think I'm being mean to you. I mean, I've got Mars in Taurus. When I discussed my chart on my birthday, I did mention it. I did not think that Mars in Taurus works particularly well. I mean, after all, Mars wants action, and Taurus is just a bit slow and a bit set in its ways. And so with Mars in Taurus, I think things could slow down in a big way, and at the same time we could become sort of more stubborn, and just going to be difficult to get things to move. And at the same time as Mars moving into Taurus, there is a square between the Sun and Saturn. And Sun square Saturn, okay, it has to happen. well, twice a year you're going to get a square between Sun and Saturn. So it's not exactly a rare event, but Sun square Saturn can be about it being difficult to get things done. Things are slow. We can't be in a rush. Perhaps we're used to Mars being in Aries, but it's no longer in Aries. And with Sun square Saturn, we perhaps have to consider things we don't really want to consider. Maybe other people's emotions, other people's sensitivities could slow things down. So if we've got a plan, we want to put something into action, we need to give it more time. So if we thought we were going to do it in a day, maybe we should allow a week. If we thought it was going to take a week, we might have to allow a month. Well, it's Sun square Saturn. I suppose that's a bit of an exaggeration. It only lasts for a day or two. But I think that Sun square Saturn could be a bit of a problem. Now, looking at all those aspects I've mentioned, what's the most important? I think the Sun square Saturn is important. I think it's important also that Mercury is going into Gemini and that Mars is going into Taurus. But I think the new moon matters. And in this video, I do want to concentrate on the new moon. Now, here is the chart of here's the chart of the new moon. So you can see that this new moon, I've set it for London. There it is on Thursday, 1:38 p.m. And this new moon, in one way, looks quite good, doesn't it? Because it's completely tied up with Venus. There's the new moon at 1618 Gemini, and there's Venus at 1648 Gemini. So new moon conjunct Venus. And you might be thinking, well, that's a really nice new moon. It's all about relationships. It's about romance. It's about being happy. It's about being successful. It's about being lucky. All that is possible. But I do actually think that there is a complication to this new moon. And one thing that we might miss when looking at this new moon is Pluto. Pluto matters in this new moon. It really matters. So why does Pluto matter? Well, Pluto is at 150 Aquarius. So that means that Pluto is sesquiquadrate the new moon, and it's sesquiquadrate Venus. So a sesquiquadrate is 135 degrees. That's 3/8 of the circle. So if you've got a cake with 8 equal slices, the sesquiquadrate represents 3 of those slices. And a sesquiquadrate is like a semi-square. If the semi-square is 1/8 of a circle, sesquiquadrate is obviously 3/8 of a circle. And it's a dynamic aspect. And so this new moon conjunct Venus is totally tied up with Pluto. And so while it is true that this new moon could be about new relationships, that really is possible, Pluto creates a certain amount of intensity, and there may be issues around power and control. So do bear that in mind. If you're in a relationship, this new moon might make things more complicated, and that would particularly be the case if it was to be a new relationship. I suppose if it's a relationship that's been going on for some time, maybe that's just not quite so important. But really, do bear it in mind. This new moon is not as straightforward as it seems, and there's another problem with this new moon. Now, remember, I was saying that on Sunday, which is Sunday the 9th, there is a square aspect between the Sun and Saturn. And so a couple of days before, you've got this new moon. And this new moon is actually square Saturn. There you go. So there you've got this new moon, 16 Gemini. And there's Saturn at 1859 Pisces. So this new moon is not just sesquiquadrate Pluto, it's square Saturn. And so that square Saturn, I think, puts a damper on proceedings. And also, remember, we've got Venus square Saturn. So I think that this new moon could be about having to face the reality of the situation. There's Saturn. And I think we may realize with this new moon that there are certain things we can't do. Or if we do want to do them, it's going to be hard work because Saturn is involved. And there are also going to be implications because of Pluto. So I'm not entirely convinced that it's going to be an easy, smooth new moon. I think it's actually quite a complicated new moon, which actually involves a certain amount of responsibility, and I think we need to be aware of the impact our actions can have. Now, this new moon, I've set it for Westminster, for London, and setting it for Westminster, you see that Neptune is on the 7th house cusp. Neptune is actually, it's conjunct England's 1066 moon. As we've already discussed, this is a complicated time for the UK, and that new moon perhaps indicates with Neptune on a descendant is that Britain's relationships with its, for example, with its friends and enemies could be difficult. Of course, we think about Ukraine and what Britain is doing in Ukraine, what they're doing to stoke the war up. Do they really know? Have they really thought it through? Plus, you've got the election coming up in Britain, and I think that's just overall creating difficulties in the UK. But it's not absolutely exact, and it's probably nothing that we don't know. And so I wanted to look at this new moon in terms of astrocartography. So from an astrocartographic perspective, let's just look at the map of the world. There we go. So that's the world, and you see this big red line here. These are all the places where the sun, that sun, moon, Venus and conjunction are on the midheaven. So you can see that it goes through Western Ireland, it goes through Portugal, it goes through sort of Morocco and goes through West Africa and then goes out to sea. So that might be a part of the world that we need to be thinking about. And notice that there's that Saturn. You can actually find a place where Saturn is on the descendant and the new moon is on the midheaven, and that place is actually Portugal. And in a moment I'm going to look at the chart for Portugal. I don't know anything about Portugal. I looked up Portugal and news, and I couldn't find anything about Portugal. I think a few days ago Portugal gave Ukraine some more money to buy weapons. There were some soccer stories, but I couldn't find anything serious about Portugal. There are some places where the sun and the moon and Venus are on a descendant, and you probably can't see it. I think it's slightly obscured. Let me see if I can bring this over. Yeah, I think you can see that now. Yeah, if you look, the places where Sun, Moon and Venus are on the descendant it goes through sort of Myanmar, Bangladesh, I think there's a place, maybe Dhaka, Bangladesh, where Neptune's on Neptune is on the IC. So there might be something going on here. Myanmar, Bangladesh, the northeast frontier of India. That is certainly a possibility. So let's actually look at that new moon if we relocate it to Lisbon. So here's a new moon relocated to Lisbon. Now this is a bit of a theoretical chart, but it's a bit difficult to see, but because you've got that big conjunction in Gemini forming. Remember, new moon, you've got 5 planets in Gemini: Jupiter, Mercury, Sun, Moon, Venus. It's like the train. The train has been in Taurus for a long time. We have these 5 planets in Taurus, but now the spotlight has moved out of Taurus and it's now really in Gemini. So that's where the action actually is, where the focus is. It's in Gemini, and the midheaven is a bit difficult to see in that chart, but the midheaven is at 1655 Gemini. So the new moon is right on the midheaven, and Saturn is exactly on a descendant. So I don't know what's going on in Portugal. I don't expect much to be going on in Portugal, but perhaps Portugal might be somewhere to look at the end of next week, see what's going on if you're into Portugal. Okay, could be West Spain. Ireland might pick up on this, but I don't know, Portugal is a place where there seems to be a lot of energy going on. And another place is Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. So there's Neptune sort of on the IC, and there's a descendant of 1516 Gemini, which has got the new moon right on that descendant. So if I was to choose 2 places where I think this new moon might have an impact, I'd perhaps go for Dhaka and Lisbon. Okay, West Coast of the Americas. That's one place that maybe we need to consider as well. Let me just show you the map again. Let's bring it. Oops, sorry. There you go. See, these are all the places that you can have a line where you've got the Sun, Moon, and Venus, where that new moon is right on the ascendant, where it's rising when it's exact. And you can see that this line goes through California, Oregon, and that looks like southwest Washington. So we might just want to have a quick look at what the new moon looks like if we relocate it to Los Angeles. So there's there's a new moon set for London. So I'm just going to relocate it to Los Angeles, see if that, to show you what I mean. There you see Los Angeles, you've got an ascendant of 14 Gemini, and you've got Sun, Moon, and Venus at 16 Gemini. So Los Angeles is just a big city on the west coast of the United States. There are other cities, Oregon, Seattle, maybe even British Columbia, Vancouver. In fact, both Vancouvers, Vancouver, Washington, and Vancouver, British Columbia, all of those places could be impacted by this new moon. So have a look, perhaps at the end of the week, see what's going on the West Coast. I'm not saying it's going to be anything necessarily disastrous, because, when I looked at Portugal, I sort of showed you that Saturn was on the descendant, but we don't have Saturn or Neptune doing anything. It's just about that new moon on the ascendant. I don't see Uranus rising, so I'm not saying it's going to be difficult, though we shouldn't forget that that new moon is tied up with Pluto. Pluto is making a sesquiquadrate to that new moon. Okay, so now I want to consider a few charts that might be impacted by this new moon. And I'm going to start with my favourite chart. That don't take this too seriously. It's just a coincidence, but I'm just pointing it out because I want to. This is a chart for Hiroshima. As you know, I'm into stuff that's nuclear. I just can't help myself. And the thing about Hiroshima was, which I find really overwhelming about this chart, is that it was an airburst and it was a uranium bomb. And at this chart, Uranus was exactly on the midheaven. So the midheaven was 1630 Gemini, and Uranus was at 1629 Gemini. So Uranus was exactly on the midheaven at the time of this. At the time the bomb was, I think this was the time, actual chart of the bomb released, and I think it exploded a little bit later. But Uranus on the midheaven, it describes the event perfectly, really. And then we have this new moon. So if we set up a chart for Hiroshima and we put our new moon, the new moon around it, then we can see that this new moon is exactly on the Hiroshima, Uranus, the Uranus and midheaven, and so that it may be that nuclear issues are perhaps highlighted with the new moon. I think that at the moment people are quite worried about nuclear war, about are the Russians going to use tactical weapons, or are we all think about the Russians using tactical nuclear weapons, but I think the West are just as capable as using them. Russia's red lines in Ukraine, and there's this question about whether or not the US is going to allow Ukraine to use its missiles to attack targets deep in Russia, and there is concern. What would Russia do? Could Russia have a demonstration? For example, exploding a nuclear weapon just for the sake of it? I don't know. Maybe somewhere over Western Europe, perhaps. I mean, I'm exaggerating here, but nuclear issues are, I think, going to be in people's minds with this new moon. I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen, but I just think we need to just bear in mind that this new moon does link with the Hiroshima chart. It's happened before. It's not an entirely unusual event. But still, with all this aggravation going on in the world, particularly in Ukraine, when you've got a new moon conjunct Hiroshima, I think we do have to bear that in mind. Now, one chart that I haven't looked at yet, and that is at least a chart of a person, and that is a chart of Barron Trump. And Barron Trump is, of course, Donald Trump's son with Melania. And I have been looking at his chart a bit. I mean, he's just turned 18, so I think I would take the view that he's not a child. I think we can look at his chart, and obviously it's not about being critical. It's just noticing that things are being perhaps highlighted in his chart. And we must remember, with Trump, with this verdict, what is the impact it's having on Melania? What impact is it having on Barron? It must be pretty traumatic, I would guess. And Barron Trump, born March the 20th, he was born just before the spring equinox. So his sun is in the last degree of Pisces. And so he's got Neptune conjunct his sun at the moment. Now, I don't know how you see the sun. Okay, you could see the sun as just simply being a universal significator of the father. The sun is a male planet. That's one way of looking at it. And so Neptune conjunct the sun, it's very confusing for him, I would have thought. What's he supposed to think? What's he supposed to do? How is he supposed to respond? What does he talk? What do him and his mother talk about? With Neptune on that sun must be, I would have said, it is really difficult, and his father should obviously not have behaved as he did in whenever it was, 2006, just after Barron was born. A few months later, what he was doing with Stormy Daniels. I was listening to sort of comments, reading the comments of a section of when I did a video on the verdict, and someone was saying, "Well, this is Trump's karma." Well, we're certainly seeing the results of his actions in 2006. And it's affecting Barron, and Neptune is on his sun. But it's not the only thing that's happening. It's this new moon. The new moon, we've got, he's got Mars at 16. Barron Trump has got his Mars at 16.5 Gemini. That's how he asserts himself. It's how he asserts himself. How he's got Mars in Gemini. I would have thought that is quite a communicative Mars. He's trying to engage with. I mean, I don't know what's he doing. Maybe he feels he has to play loads of computer games to just distract his mind. I think he's into computer games. Is that right? Well, I suppose everyone's into computer games at that age. But that Mars, new moon is on that Mars. And Pluto is sesquiquadrate his Mars. So I think he may be getting quite angry, getting quite frustrated that Pluto, what is he actually supposed to be doing? Maybe you've got some ideas about that. And that Mars is actually quite close, relatively close to his IC, because his IC is at 22 degrees 1 Gemini. So, that Mars is certainly being activated. Someone else whose Mars is being activated is the Secretary General of NATO. I've looked at his chart before. Like Barron Trump, Jens Stoltenberg has got his Mars 1632 Gemini. So he's got a new moon on his Mars, and Pluto is sesquiquadrate his Mars, and it's got to be about his whole reaction to what is going on in Ukraine. I mean, this goes on and on, but he is Secretary General of NATO. He's got a new moon on his Mars. He's kind of a representative of NATO. He's maybe a personification of NATO, and this may tell us something about NATO in general. Really, what do they say? Champing at the bit, really wanting to do something, wanting to get at Russia because Russia is walking all over the Ukrainians. That's what's happening. Real frustration there. Pluto is sesquiquadrate his Mars, really wanting to use force, want to use as much force as possible to somehow hold the Russians back. So you could say with this new moon on his Mars and Saturn sesquiquadrate his Mars, it's really dangerous. I think that new moon has made this man, I think he's already a man who's very dangerous, but I think it has making him perhaps even worse. And someone else who might be kind of indirectly impacted by this new moon is the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. But I'm not really looking at his chart. I'm looking at his inauguration, or rather when he became Chancellor. So I believe that Scholz became German Chancellor on December the 8th, 2021. And so it's kind of like an inauguration. It's like the beginning of his time as Chancellor. And when he became Chancellor, the Sun was at 1634 Sagittarius. So that means that the new moon is opposition his Sun, and its Pluto is sesquiquadrate his Sun. So perhaps Scholz, in terms of his position as Chancellor, is just feeling that the whole thing is a bit overwhelming. I don't know to what extent he's going to feel that personally. Another inauguration that is impacted by this new moon, and perhaps a more important inauguration in some ways, would be the inauguration of Volodymyr Zelensky when he became president of Ukraine. So we have to remember with Volodymyr Zelensky that a couple of weeks back his term as president ran out. He was elected in 2019 as a five-year term. His 5 years is up, and now he's ruling because there's martial law. Doesn't matter. They should really be having more elections, but they say that Ukrainian law allows them to suspend elections because they're at war. Maybe because not every I think Blinken said, well, it's okay because not every Ukrainian can vote because some of them are occupied by Russia. So anyway, it's considered to be okay. And that's Volodymyr Zelensky's chart, but I was actually wanting to look at his inauguration. And this is a chart of his inauguration. I don't know the precise time he was inaugurated. I think it was about 10 in the morning, in which case the moon is at around 16 Sagittarius. So with moon at 16 Sagittarius, again, we have got this new moon opposition the moon of the inauguration, and we've got Pluto sesquiquadrate the moon of the inauguration. And so maybe this new moon will put pressure on Zelensky in terms of his legitimacy, and there may be questions about his power, and he may have to make sort of efforts to maintain his position because new threats may come out of the woodwork. And finally, I want to look at an old favourite, and that is Prince Harry. And here's Prince Harry's chart. And Prince Harry has got Mars at 16 Sagittarius. In fact, he has got a Sun-Mars square there. So with that Sun-Mars square, this is a man who can get angry. There's a lot he's angry about. Sun in Virgo square Mars in Sagittarius. He always seems to be angry about something. And it's true that there's a new moon on his Mars. And so with a new moon on the Mars, he's also got Pluto. He's got Pluto semi-square his Mars. So Pluto semi-square his Mars, new moon opposition his Mars. He's just more angry and tense than usual. And matters aren't helped by the fact that there is this Sun square Saturn. So Sun square Saturn is right at the end of a week, and that Sun square Saturn is at around 18 Pisces. So if he's got Mars at 16 Sagittarius and Sun at 2257 Sagittarius, that means that the sort of midpoint of Sun-Mars, of that Sun-Mars, will be at around 19 mutable. And so Saturn is moving onto his Sun-Mars midpoint. And of course it goes retrograde at the end of this month. at I think 1926 Virgo, and so that does mean that I think Harry's going to be under a lot of pressure, a lot of stuff for Harry to be angry about, and maybe there'll be events where we can actually see what he's angry about. But yeah, we'll find out soon enough, I think, or maybe not. Maybe it will just be something private. Okay, that's the astrology, and I now want to consider today from the perspective of the I Ching. So just a reminder, if you don't want your I Ching done, then you don't have to watch any more of this video, because this reading only applies to people watching the I Ching segment of this video. Okay, so I started off by asking the question, what is a week starting on Monday, June the 3rd, going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And so I remember I'm going to be looking at it from a general perspective, then money, then career, and then relationships. So the first hexagram I got was hexagram 23, which is splitting apart. I think, in a general sense, this weekend, we may realize that something just isn't working. That things are starting to disintegrate, or something going on this weekend. It just gives us a clear idea that it's just not working. People are not being very clever, not being very sensible, and it just may be that people who don't deserve any respect are getting respect, and it seems that the old order is just under pressure. And the I Ching suggests that the inferior people are rising up, and the superior people are not being taken seriously, and just the whole thing is just not holding together. And we have two moving lines, and the fourth line moves and the fifth line. So the fourth line moving, that is a point where the disintegration is actually reaching its peak. One image of this splitting apart is of a couch. It's like a piece of furniture. There's a top, or it's a couch, and there are the legs, and it's basically it's splitting apart. I mean, you might think of like termite ants are just eating the legs away, and it's the whole thing is falling apart. You can see this. If this is a piece of furniture, it looks pretty unstable, and so with the fourth line moving, this is where the disintegration is really reaching its peak. It's not getting any worse, but it's pretty bad. And then we move to the fifth line, and at the fifth line, finally, things stop getting worse. There's a point where we start to have an impact. People will start to listen to us. People who were behaving badly start to kind of stop what they're doing, and indeed the inferior elements can be transformed. So maybe there's a suggestion here that we need to persist. We need to try to just use our influence, and for a long time people are just not listening to us, but eventually they get it. There's also a suggestion here with this fifth line moving that maybe we can benefit from an unfortunate situation. It seems an unfortunate situation, doesn't seem to be working in anyone's favour, but actually we may be able to benefit from it. And so we've got two moving lines, and this hexagram, it transitions. And it transitions to hexagram number 12, which is standstill. It's not a good hexagram. it's perhaps not a disastrous hexagram, but it's like we've got the situation under control. It's not doesn't mean we can actually make anything happen. We've controlled the situation, and now rather than being worrying about disintegration, it's just standstill. Nothing is happening. We can't get anything to move. We're not perhaps being recognised as we should be, but I suppose it's, compared with the previous hexagram, it's not quite so dangerous. It's not quite so explosively bad. We can now sort of perhaps catch our breath, but we can't really expect anything much to happen. So looking at the week as a whole, it's going to be a difficult week. The first half of the week, there's going to be a lot to try to cope with, trying to deal with a situation that is really falling apart, and we need to get it back together. Then by the end of the week, there's some possibility that we can start to create a certain amount of stability. Perhaps things aren't getting much worse, but it's just about stability. It's certainly not about progress. And it's kind of going to be difficult to relax there. So as far as money is concerned, I think that the financial situation, if that is of concern to you, remember, this is not financial advice. This is for entertainment purposes only. But from a financial perspective, with splitting apart, I think it's very likely that our attempts to make financial progress may not work out. And perhaps something we've been working on financially, trying to perhaps create something useful financially, trying to organize our finances, trying to make sure the books balance. It's going to be very hard work, and we may find that other people's behavior is pretty bad, and other people can't be trusted with money, and it just doesn't help. So if other people are involved with your financial situation in any way, yeah, they're going to just contribute to the problem. And it's going to reach a stage where you can see the possibilities of really bad stuff happening. You can almost see the possibility of ruin. But in the end, people will listen to you. And I think in the end, you can take control. Maybe it's kind of like a sort of one of those films where you see a plane crashing into the ground, and the controls don't work, and it's going down, down, and down, and down, and then fifth line, it's like you can pull out of a dive at the last moment, and get people to listen to you, get the controls to respond, and then this hexagram moves to standstill. Nothing is happening. It's not, perhaps things aren't getting worse, but still you can't really trust anybody. It's difficult to get support. It just might feel that absolutely nothing is happening. And it may be that it's because you have created this standstill. You've just said enough is enough. And there's been a stop, and said at least the situation has been stabilized. Turning to career and business, if this is relevant to you, or you have a job, then splitting apart indicates to me that the situation in your business at work is not great. I think that there's not much agreement here, and people may be talking at cross purposes, and perhaps something you're involved with is simply not working out. And I think it's just going to be a general atmosphere of discontent. And I suppose in certain situations of splitting apart, you may feel that if you're doing a job, you may feel just unhappy with it. You may feel that it's time to leave your job, or maybe it's time to say goodbye. So if you're doing something in terms of business with other people, you may realize that you can't work with them anymore. Or perhaps there's a contract you're doing with someone, and it's just not working. And there's not a great deal that can be done about it in a way, because there seems to be just general. It's a situation where there are just fundamental incompatibilities, and we've got those two moving lines. The fourth line from the bottom moves. So fourth line means that just to begin with, things actually get worse. It really is a situation where there is splitting apart. The edifice seems to be collapsing. Then the fifth line moves. And with the fifth line moving, I think there is a sense in which you start taking a bit of control. You start to understand what's going on. And at the same time, people all of a sudden will start to listen to you. So if you want something to happen at work and you're not happy with the situation, you've spent a long time trying to get your message across, people aren't listening, but then at a certain point you start making progress. People do accept that you are someone who does know some of the answers, and you can start to have an influence. And then this hexagram splitting apart, it does transition, and it transitions to standstill. So standstill is not, although it's not a good hexagram, I think it's better from splitting apart. It's just things are at a standstill, things aren't moving, and you may be in a situation where you recognize still that you do need to distance yourself from certain people. Okay, maybe they have been listening to you in the past. Maybe someone has just recently, someone has behaved in a bad way. Maybe they've apologized. But it doesn't change the fact that you probably shouldn't be having anything more to do with them. And so in terms of business or whatever, I think it may be standstill because you have to understand that just some people are just completely not being constructive, and that if you continue with the status quo, your path is going to continue to be blocked. So maybe it's just important that change is contemplated, and that might mean that certain people, indeed it might be that you recognize that in your current career, or your current job, or perhaps the current department you're working, or whatever the situation, you're just being blocked, and it's just not going to happen. Now, if you're looking for a job, it's a similar picture. It does seem that in many cases you are being blocked, but you're not able to get any traction. Now, that may be because you're looking in the wrong areas. You've decided you want to go into an area and you are blocked. But do remember that this is a hexagram. This reading is for the week. I'm just suggesting that in terms of work or business or career, I'm just saying it's basically just not going to be a good week, but there are 52 weeks in a year. So don't take it to heart. Then there's relationships. And, well, splitting apart is obviously not a good hexagram to have if you're asking a relationship question, is it? And do remember that when I say relationships, I'm talking about relationships of all natures. It could be romantic, it could be business, it just could be a friend. Doesn't matter. Doesn't really matter. And with splitting apart, I think there is just a feeling that you and someone else are incompatible with each other. And that's especially the case if you haven't known them for very long. Obviously, if we're talking about a relationship that's been going on for decades, it's a different matter. It may be there's a temporary incompatibility, a temporary splitting apart. But I think there is a sense in which, if you look at some of the people you're dealing with at the moment, it can't go any further. And I think if you do nothing, it's not going to work. There seem to be some people in your life who are just not being helpful at all. They are undermining you. It's like that piece of furniture with the termite ants chewing at the legs. They're undermining you. So if they're undermining you, you've got to work out, what are you going to do about it? And in the first instance, it gets worse. They undermine you even more. That's the fourth line moving. Then the fifth line moves. So maybe if someone is being intolerable, maybe you can stick it out. And perhaps in the end, you'll be able to make some sense of the situation, and people will, certain people will listen to you, and you're going to be able to sort of make an impact. And so maybe you'll take the view you don't have to split up in a particular relationship. Maybe you can just grit your teeth, and in the end, you'll have an impact. It's up to you, but is it really worth it? Because, this hexagram splitting apart, it does move, and it does move to standstill. So if it's moving to standstill, that might indicate a relationship. Okay, it might not be in a state of complete crisis, but nothing much is happening. And so that might also indicate that certain people are completely blocking your progress. You can't do the things that you'd like to do because certain people are holding you up. And that might be why it might have been a good idea to split from them. But at the same time, don't think that splitting from someone is necessarily going to solve the problem. There's still going to be a sense in which you do feel a bit blocked. You can't expect much to happen. So if you're looking for a new relationship, then you've got standstill here. That says a standstill. I don't think you're going to find people who are going to be on your wavelength. But just a reminder, this is a hexagram just for a week. It's not about a month. It's not for the next 10 years. I'm just saying, in terms of relationships, I just don't think it's going to be a very good week. And you can't expect every week to be good, can you? Okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to say for today. And I hope you found this video of some interest and you weren't too discouraged by the I Ching. And if you found this video of use, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.